Welcome, friends. Part 2 of OBEJournal 2023, number 2. And while I was taking a little break there, I came across John Kabat-Zinn's wonderful mindfulness meditation guide, Wherever You Go, There You Are. Something of a classic. But a point that I came across that I'd like to use in the next section here. He's talking about backpacking with my family in wilderness and how he was recently struck by the question of footing. With each step, the foot has to come down somewhere, climbing or descending over boulder fields, steep inclines, on and off trails. Our feet make split-second decisions for us about where and how to come down. What angle, how much pressure, heel or toe, rotated or straight. The kids don't ever ask, "Daddy, where do I put my feet? Should I step on this rock or that one?" They just do it. And I've noticed that they find a way. They choose where to put their feet at each step, and it's not simply where I put mine. What this says to me is that our feet find their own way. Watching my own, I'm amazed at how many different places and ways I might put my foot down with each step, and how out of this unfolding momentary potential, the foot ultimately commits to one way, executes with full weight on it, or less if it's hazardous, and then lets go as the next foot makes its choice and I move forward. All of this occurs virtually without thinking, except at the occasional tricky spots where thought and experience do come into play, and I might have to give my youngest child a hand. But that is the exception, not the rule. Ordinarily, we're not looking at our feet and thinking about each step. We are looking out ahead on the trail. And our brain, taking it all in, making split-second decisions for us that put the foot down in a way that conforms to the needs of the terrain underfoot in the moment. That doesn't mean that there is no wrong way to step. You do have to be careful and sense your footing. It's just that the eyes and the brain are very good at rapid assessment of terrain and giving detailed directions to torso, limbs, and feet, and so that the whole process of taking a step on rough ground is one of exquisite balance and motion, even with the complication of boots and heavy packs. There is built-in mindfulness here. Rough terrain brings it out in us, and if we do a trail 10 times, we'll each solve the problem of each footstep differently each time. Covering ground on foot always unfolds out of the uniqueness of the present motion. It's no different in meditation. There really is no one right way to practice, although there are pitfalls along this path too, and they have to be looked out for. It is best to encounter each moment with freshness, its rich potential held in awareness. Well, that putting the foot down and knowing intimately and accurately and almost automatically where and when to put it. It strikes me as a very great metaphor for our adventure in physical plane life. And why do we have that intuitive understanding of where to put the next step? Past lives. We're unconsciously connected to the many adventures, joyful and tragic, in past lives. What we did and what it took us to. We can connect with that store of knowledge, and we all do. And on a moment-to-moment basis, although it's not conscious, it's automatic, or almost automatic. And it doesn't really take that much analysis. It takes spontaneous reaction to unconscious knowledge, I would say. And indicates to me that our store of knowledge is deep and unending, whether we feel smart or silly or dopey at any one point in time. And it's something to keep in mind as you have your astral travels that you only vaguely remember, perhaps. Keep in mind that you actually know what you're doing. It may not seem like you know what you're doing, but you are guiding yourself. You're being helped by, more wiser souls, if you like, spirit guides. But you are, to a large degree, guiding yourself. That smart part of you that guides that seemingly ignorant part, the one who knows. As I often say to clients during regressions and meditations, if they don't know what to do next or what they're confronting, I say, go to your place of knowing. It's a place and you can go there. It's a focus of consciousness. There is a place of doubt and a place of ignorance, but there's also a place of knowing. And when we astral travel, we're getting closer to the place of knowing, which I think essentially is the higher self. But you're well on your way once you get to the astral plane. You see a lot more than you see on this plane. And when one is meditating, as John Kabat-Zinn would like us to do more, one can also see the stretch of the journey rather than the confusion of details that we stumble upon from moment to moment. Like, what will I do next? Should I do this? Should I do that? No, maybe I should do this. Yeah, that's more pressing. I should do that. And, I'm like anyone else. I do that almost every day. Although less now that I'm retired. The scheduling isn't quite so intense. And but essentially it's the same thing. And our astral travels are filled with all these choices. Who am I going to see? What am I going to do? How am I going to interact? There are many options. I've included in earlier videos from years ago some of those options. Visiting with family and friends who are quote-unquote deceased. Checking out many of the beautiful, exquisitely beautiful locations on the astral planes. Whether you are thinking urban or rural, there are some cities, many cities on the higher astral that are exquisitely designed architecturally. And my good friend June6 has painted and videoed them, or using computer technology. And their blending of, how shall I say, architectural forms and forms of nature are stunningly marvelous. So there's all that beauty that you can check out, all that breathtaking, oh my God, that's beautiful stuff. And in those higher planes, you will certainly meet more elevated beings who will spread joy and compassion and kindness just by standing next to you. Whereas on the lower planes, the ignorant and doubtful and angry and low self-esteem people will spread their vibrations to you in a way that is not enhancing to your spirits. But you get used to it. You know how to deal with it once you've practiced it. I wouldn't say go there like right off on your first step. Wait for some guidance. and sometimes younger souls get stuck there on their way. I have on several occasions been asked to help out with young children who wake up screaming, and it's usually they're on their way to the astral plane and get stuck on the lower astral plane. And there's all kinds of little nasties there that take pleasure in frightening children. And I have to intervene and guide the child through that little swamp to where they want to go. And I've done that a few times. And others do it too, it's not just me. And but it's all about projecting and where you're going and not getting stuck anywhere. Although some would argue that in the upper astral plane, you are getting stuck in the paradise beauty of it all. But let me tell you, it's a great place to get stuck. If one is heading to the formless realms where the higher self dwells, the monad, of which we are a living, eternal part, even though we're deposited here in time and space, and feeling not in the least unlimited and wise. If you're going there, then the paradise worlds can be a bit of a detour. And then as you move along on this path of understanding, it seems like many places can be detours on your way to completion and fullness and complete understanding. The joys of partial understanding are many, and I spend a lot of time. That's Gordon here and the Gordon on the astral plane that you met before, involved with artistic, creative activities on all levels. I'm very interested in that. And I interact with many people who are involved in that work. And whether it's visual, audio, text, the whole dance, theater, the whole 9 yards. And these are often very energetic, creative, joyful people as they pursue that path and make many thrilling discoveries and inventions. But I do recognize the higher self part of me recognizes, there is the monad up there, and you have a goodly amount of monadic wisdom within you that you either use or don't use. That monadic higher self wisdom that understands all rather than just a part understands that artistic creation is just one of many ways to explore as you reach out towards complete understanding. And it does eventually hold you up. And but looking at it in terms of eternity, it's not that much of a hold up, but it is a partial understanding. And the same with explorations in the scientific realm and the medical realm, and you're solving problems. Researchers are solving what we would call medical problems or technical problems. Artists are solving musical and narrative issues, or finding new ways to express old truths. Modern composers, for example, need to unhook themselves from the glories of Mozart and Beethoven and Stravinsky to create anew. Just as modern artists have to unleash themselves from the great traditions of the Renaissance and later periods. They don't love to paint as beautifully as Rembrandt and Vermeer and Constable and that whole 9 yards of famous painters, but they have to, stretch out on their own and find who they are artistically. But once they find out who they are artistically, or scientifically, or medically, or technically, they get to move on. They don't always stay the same. And that to me is an illustration of partial understanding. And when you get to the full understanding of any creative activity, you can see that it's all good. It all fills in the gaps in our various understandings. The harmonies that Beethoven didn't use, the shape and texture combinations that Dali or Picasso didn't explore, the sculptures that have yet to be imagined and manifested. Yeah, I think you can see where I'm going with this, or you can even move on to the creation of societies, cultures, and planets. As we have mentioned earlier, they're all experiments in creativity that are ultimately only partially successful. And but yet they fit the needs of growing, expanding souls, just as each area of the astral plane fits the needs of souls at various stages of growth. And when you reach that understanding, you can glimpse, at least, if not see, how perfectly balanced it all is. That every soul is where it needs to be at a certain point, at that point in growth. It needs to face certain joys. It needs to face certain struggles and experience certain joys. And it's all for the growth. As plants and bushes and trees need a certain amount of rain, wind, and sun. And it's not for me to decide what that portion is, but we know it exists and it happens. So partial understandings and complete understandings. As we move on up the ladder of the planes, physical, lower astral, middle astral, upper astral, mental, causal, all the way up to the monadic plane, where everything seems to be understood and accepted rather than rebelled against or fixed or changed or made more efficient. That is what the monad understands. It understands and I'm connecting to my own monadic intelligence here, the perfection of all created things, even though there are faults and difficulties and challenges within those perfections. It's the perfection of imperfection. Paradoxically, as much spiritual truth turns out to be, embracing paradox, embracing contradiction, and just getting on with it. Whether the getting on with it is a challenging task or a joyful pastime. You just keep moving. You just keep growing. And obviously, we take little breaks from growing, or we think we're taking little breaks. Just as you take a nap in the middle of a busy day, if you can fit one in, and recognizing the regeneration and, the regeneration that it gives you. And yet, that nap is just as important as any constructive activity. and that which gives you strength and renewed vigor to go on to the next thing. And I often see my life that way, as going on to the next thing. And I'm sure others of you do too. So again, our astral explorations do increase our understanding of this, that, and the other. And we get to understand that our loved one that died in pain or agony or suffering has grown from that experience and is much, shall we say, happier now. And certainly the evidence, the vastly and quickly accumulating evidence of video interviews with people that had near-death experiences and what they experienced of their expanded being is quite remarkable. It was growing 20 and 30 years ago when I first tipped into it, and now, thanks to, I would have to say, the portal that I'm using now, YouTube, is it's on the edge of being huge at this point. There are so many near-death experiences that transcend conventional understanding of who we are and what we can accomplish. It's astounding. Perhaps you're familiar with this and perhaps you're not. But there is much to explore there, and I would recommend it. There are a number of sites that deal with the NDE experience. I'm sure you can find them. And the variety of experiences that people have of their expanded beings is remarkable. It's astonishing. They find out that they set almost everything up ahead of time before being born, including all the challenging and painful experiences, including all the lapses into ignorance, where they chunder along in great levels of ignorance, thinking that they're doing the right thing, only to find out that actually, no, they're not. And really, they should be opening up to the reality of spirit and the illusion of ignorance. There are many illusions of ignorance that need to be explored and discarded. Many. And you find out through these interviews all the different levels of ignorance that people went, oh no, I lived like that. I should have lived like this. I should have opened myself to the greater reality. And that begs the question of, why do we close ourselves off to the greater reality? I think it's mostly because of facing the challenge of it. Let's go down there and be ignorant and see if we can struggle our way out of it. Because up here on the astral and the higher planes, there's a lot less ignorance and a lot less struggle. And the game of the physical plane is more of a challenge. And of course, while we're in the midst of that challenge, as many people will attest, it seems like pointless, not worthwhile, self-defeating, all that sort of thing, and leads to a lot of suicides. There are many hundreds of thousands of suicides every year. And of course, that can be seen also as a growth experience in the long haul. If you learn from it and you approach the same problems with a fresh set of vigorous ideas of how to overcome them, then it's a big plus. And there's enough past life regression work that you can either study or experience where people have suicided several times and are here seeking a way not to do it this time around. But let me not emphasize that too much, because there are many life paths where people trap themselves into limited experience and then think, why did I do that? And it's a habit, it's a rut, it's something you fall into with incarnation, regardless of your great plans. For the male in the species, the trap is getting caught up in aggressive male activity, violence, aggression, military stuff, where they get hooked by the propaganda of governments and religions and die young, fighting for the greater glory of something else, because they don't see the greater glory of themselves. That's an important point. With women, it's often the struggle, the attraction to marriage and childbirth. And they get caught up, and have done for many hundreds of years and still do in many parts of the world, in the educative but limited experience of having large families and being strung out in endless poverty. And it's quite easy for that to be a repeated rut, just as men get caught up in, as I say, military stuff and aggressive testosterone-fueled activity, which leads to an early death. And the ruts that we can fall into in incarnation, that we look at when we're out of incarnation, thinking about it or reminiscing about the last one, that we regret and think, oh, I shouldn't do that again. But you fall into it because it's a habit, it's a pattern, it's something you can't resist. But you have to learn to resist it if you want to grow and expand. So enough of the life lectures here. Let us project a little bit here, although I was philosophizing rather than projecting there, and I hope you didn't find it too frustrating. But let's project. I get the vibration that you, the audience, would like me to project to these places of partial understanding rather than the fuller understanding of the monadic plane. Because on some level, the partial understanding is more, exciting, titillating, fascinating. And I've certainly catered to this in myself and with yourselves by talking to musicians and composers and artists of various kinds, celebrities, and most recently, people like David Crosby and Jeff Beck, Brief Encounters, and earlier folk like Robin Williams and Dennis Hopper and Ray Manzarek, in their transition periods where they were, getting used to the new realities, the new joyful, creative realities that they found themselves in. And that is fascinating, I agree. But it is a level of partial understanding. They will often refer to their greater abilities, creative abilities, and the joy at finding the astral plane is almost perfectly situated location to exercise those expanded abilities on whatever level their abilities are. There, for actors, there is much theater and film, and musicians, much performing in various groups and orchestras and solo, and the ability to absorb the musical traditions of other cultures without having to, save up money and get on a plane and stay in a hotel or whatever. this leads to a great sense of enthusiasm and joy amongst those of a creative bent. And I can understand why that would be exciting for you to experience, or at least interesting, if not exciting. The understanding that artists, or those of an artistic bent, whether famous or not so famous, can create colored images and forms on a blank canvas with the mind eye, rather than the brush or the knife. That's a fascinating and challenging advance for them, because they have to really learn to control their thoughts. The rest of us get to experience that when we either remodel a room or a garden in a dwelling on the astral plane, or are encouraged by others to actually build one from scratch. It's a great and fun challenge. And you get it wrong the first 50 times, because your mind can't really create the detail, hasn't got the discipline to create the detail of a certain type of carving or a certain type of blending of colors if you're doing wallpaper. I'm back to houses here. Or combinations of flowers and plants that look marvelous together. Some, not all of them do. And there's rearranging and redoing and all sorts of things going on there. And but essentially it's the same activity, learning to control the mind as it creates, how shall I say, the inner visions of its imagination. And that again is a partial understanding. One moves beyond that, just as more advanced souls create, as a gift and a service to others, certain communities and landscapes on the astral plane that suit certain types of souls that need certain types of experiences. David Spangler has an interesting account of being shown by his guide a certain area, and the being that created it, a sort of not quite angelic being, but an advanced soul that wanted to be of service to others, and creates an area that includes dwellings and cultural aspects and nature in a community. And they oversee that, they overlight that community with creative input, constant creative input that keeps it alive and functioning, but yet remain invisible to the souls that are, how shall I say, happily living there. And I might get to that if I can find it next time. And but it gives you an understanding, as other older works will give you, that many areas of the astral plane were created by advanced beings wishing to be of service and seeing a need or a series of needs. And once you get past that understanding, you can gingerly approach the next one, which is that you yourself may have been one of those advanced beings that helped create certain communities, atmospheres, locations on the astral plane that would suit certain souls in certain levels of growth. Now, you may not be that advanced being in this incarnation, but that doesn't mean you couldn't be in a past. It depends on how much of your higher self monadic wisdom you bring into this life with you. Some of the past life regression works suggest, I think Michael Newton does, the percentage that you bring. An older soul will bring 25%, a younger soul might bring as much as 70%, because they need those reminders. And all of which breeds the next question, which is, does soul growth like that, and the amount of the percentage that you bring with you of your total knowing self, does that proceed in a linear fashion? A little more each time? Well, no, it doesn't actually. It depends on what plans you want to make and what you want to do. It varies. When in certain lives you choose to be one who follows the left-hand path of manipulation and deceit and criminality, you can bring a certain level of understanding, but not that much. Because you're learning to be cunning and clever and sneaky. And you might regret that later when you look back 500 years. But again, it was an education. It was something you thought you needed to do, and also something that can proceed from a very high understanding of life on Earth, a very sort of Zen-like understanding that we need bad and wicked people in order that others can learn how to cope with that wickedness and that badness and that criminality, and learn to either live with it or fight it. And, the good guys and the bad guys. It's a whole scenario. And it's all quite necessary. And as I've written in other books, explore your dark pasts. Explore them and see where you went wrong or where you succeeded. Because ultimately it's all the same. Being a villain is much the same as being a hero, as Brian Wilson sung in that great song, Heroes and Villains. A work of great wisdom as well as beauty. So the necessity of heroes and villains as we proceed through time and space, that balance, that polarity, you get to see it more and more. You understand its great harmony, as it were. And you can either get caught up in the struggle, like a criminal or a cop or a lawyer, or you can stand back and sit in your garden and be amused by detective novels where it all plays out. And what are you seeing that how I hope you are, that getting caught up in that heroes and villains game at certain points, and then later not getting caught up, leading a more tranquil, meditative life, sitting in your garden reading detective novels, and experiencing the amusement of all that game playing stuff, but on a higher level. And then the next stage, of course, is throwing away your attachment to those novels and those plays and those films that portray that, perhaps in a very creative and amusing way. And I'm thinking right up to Shakespeare here. There is a life beyond great theatre and great art. And we'll maybe get to that next time. But I'm hoping you're seeing the progression here, the movement toward full understanding, where we can get caught up in the joys of partial understanding. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying it's part of the path. And given my views of things, where I'm at, I would say enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. And do not regret or get bundled up in remorse. Just move on. I mean, you can apologize if you want. That helps. And apologizing for bad behavior, we'll get to that to another time. I think it's an interesting situation, as are many situations in life. And I get the feeling we're going to do a fair bit of apologizing to these aliens that are visiting, either right now or fairly soon. And they might do a little bit of apologizing to us, too. Anyway, it's the next series of treaties, I think, that we're going to expand into. After the warlike aggression, we go into the treaty and the new peace. Bye-bye.